have had the most eclectic collection of human beings over the last 38 hours, and they've all brought something brilliant, something unique, their perspective, their experience, and it's been absolutely incredible. And you definitely fit that bill as well of being yet another very unique individual. Father Dave, please will you tell us a bit about how you came to know Julian, how you ended up in boxing with him in the Ecuadorean Embassy?
It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, it's not the sort of thing most people associate with Julian boxing. They probably expect me to be doing mad things like that. But, I mean, the connection most directly was through his dad, who's a good friend of mine, John Shipman. And John was part of the church here for some time, and we've been quite close for a long time. But I guess the association with John came because, my existing support for Julian and for the broader work that he was involved in. I mean, getting there to box with him, I guess, was just a bit of a novelty. But part of that was just, there is a major issue about Julian's health and just making sure he stays fit. And I'm not the only one who was doing boxing training with him, believe it or not. He had another good man there who was working with him at that level.
I think an ex-SAS guy who became a peace activist.
That's correct. I wasn't sure if he wanted to be mentioned by name because we're associated with any form of pugilism now because he's very much a pacifist. But yeah, he was doing some fitness work with Julian in an ongoing way. I got in, did a couple of rounds with him. I had Solomon Egberine with me, who was Australian junior welterweight champion. So we did a few rounds with him. But I mean, yeah, as I say, I mean, part of the problem with his solitary confinement is that, he doesn't have access to medical facilities and he's got to maintain his health. And it's, if he needs to go out and see the doctors, he can't, So and I know, too, there were people who would love to be able to say, he's getting sick or he needs to go to hospital and, So I think being able to show publicly that he was in great health, which he was when I saw him, was an important thing, important contribution to the narrative.
It's true. And there's this horrible catch-22, I know from studying the psychosocial reports, which Julian and WikiLeaks published. There were a couple of things in there that really stuck with me. One was where they're saying that Julian had a treadmill to try to keep his vascular fitness up, but it was actually traumatizing him because no matter how fast he ran or how far he walked, he wasn't going anywhere. There was no change in environment, no change in circumstances, and it was distorting that sense of space and time. And the treadmill actually became more problematic than useful for that reason. But another thing that really stuck with me from those reports is that he didn't feel that he could disclose the true extent of his physical ailments to his own physicians because to do so poses a threat to him, because any weakness that he discloses can be manipulated or capitalized on by his tormentors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why it's a good thing we were able to publish some pictures of us boxing together at least and showing him in perfect health, which I say he certainly was in perfect health when I was with him, thank God. But I hear what you're saying about the treadmill too. Now you give me another reason to hate treadmills. I never go near them. I think it's very, for most of us, sort of a very bourgeois thing that sort of, we're training outside, I can't go running, get wet. That's my approach anyway.
So, Father Dave, what led you to activism?
That's a good question, sister. For me, I always had a close friendship with Mordechai Vanunu since 1986. And I guess it was my friendship with Morty that opened up a whole world to me. For those who don't know Morty was the guy who told the world about the nuclear weapons development program under the Negev Desert that the Israeli government was involved in, and the stockpile of nuclear weapons under the Negev Desert. Morty wandered into our church one night, Friday night. He was just a Jewish backpacker, And remember, I showed him around the church. And interestingly, we got talking philosophy. And he'd been studying philosophy in Jerusalem. I'd been studying philosophy at Sydney University. We got into lengthy conversations and became good friends. And over time, he joined the church as well. He ended up being baptized with us. And then he started telling me, look, I've got these photos, these nuclear weapons, and I'm not sure what to do with them. But he very much felt called. In fact, when he was eventually baptized, he said, now I give my life to Jesus. Now I do what I must do. And that's when he basically went out and told the story about the nuclear arsenal development in Israel. I guess I was very naive at that stage, still in my 20s. And it was, Morty said, they may kill me. They'll try and kill me, But I really wasn't anticipating what would happen. He was kidnapped, put in the back of a cargo ship, shipped back to Israel, held in secret trial, given 18 years prison sentence for treason, betrayal, treason, espionage, and betrayal of state secrets. And he spent 11 and a half years in solitary, which is the longest any human being has been in solitary. And, I wrote to him each month when he was there, and was eventually there when he was released, which I think is probably the closest I've ever been to being killed, as far as I know. It was a riot. But part of that process for me was then looking at the media which came out about Morty, because I knew Morty very well. And these people the media that talked about him as a sophisticated Israeli spy and things like this, people don't know him at all. He was just a very ordinary bloke who was trying to do the right thing. And watching the way the media manipulated him and watching the way governments and people talked about him really opened my eyes to the fact that there's a lot of things going on which we're not aware of, and that governments lie to us all the time, and that the media manipulates the truth. And so for me, the experience with Morty really opened my eyes to a much bigger picture. I mean, most obviously the Palestinian situation, which is something I've been involved in as best as I can since, but more broadly, just the whole problem of media lies, the government war machine, all that sort of stuff. And so when Julian comes along and is trying to shine a light on all of that, in a similar way, working with people like Morty, Chelsea Manning, people like this, other people of good conscience and of courage who are willing to speak out, what could I do but support as best I could.
And there is an extremely strong tradition of activism, of religious activism in Catholic circles especially. I was extremely surprised when I accidentally became an activist in 2011 to discover this immense solidarity network among the churches. I had no idea that there was, in fact, protest chaplains. I think partly they were there in solidarity, but I also think sometimes that they were there for our security, because they would kind of huddle around us, between the police and the protesters, and were actually quite, truly peacemakers.
Oh, look, absolutely right. And I think you've had Kieran O'Reilly on, who's a good friend and part of the Catholic Workers Network. And I think Catholic Workers have had a fantastic history of activism and in support of Julian, very much so, But I personally think really, in a sense, religious communities is where it's at in terms of, I think we need unity between religious faith communities worldwide if we're going to be able to combat the sort of forces we're dealing with here. Not just Christian, but, I work a lot with the Islamic community and trying to build links there and see where we can work together to try and combat the forces against us here. I really feel strongly that's the best chance we've got of moving forward in this. I should add, I'm not Catholic. Uh-huh. Not that I'm not wanting to be Catholic.
Are you Baptist?
No. I've been married twice and I've got 4 children. So
okay, definitely not Catholic.
I wouldn't be telling anybody about that if I was.
I'm sorry. What is your denomination, Father
I'm
David?
Anglican.
Anglican, my apologies.
Yeah, Episcopal Church of England, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, no, I'm not a celibate, I'm afraid.
So what is the roots of religious activism? I mean, is it literally the persecution of Jesus Christ and ever since then, or how is it that we have these protest chaplains and these, amazing Christian activists?
Yeah, that's a really good question, but I think, it's rooted in the person Jesus himself. Surely, I mean, Jesus was the one who challenged the authorities of his day, passively. And I think people have drawn on that sense. I mean, Martin Luther King perhaps is a very obvious example in terms of drawing on the passivism of Jesus. And you look at the effectiveness of his work. I think we've seen, but see, not just in the Christian community either. I think we've seen some wonderful. I was in Iran recently and speaking at a university in Mashhad, and I said, you look back over the last couple of 100 years, or even over the last 100 years, where have you seen powerful activist movements? They've always had a religious base to them. You look at Mahatma Gandhi's work, peace work, leading to the independence of India. You look at Martin Luther King's work, the civil rights movement and his anti-war activism, and quite frankly, the Iranian Revolution, which, while in its aftermath was very bloody, in its the process to which the overthrow of the Shah was a very peaceful revolution. Millions of people passively taking the streets, inspired by their own and supported by their own religious leaders. So. Personally, I really believe this is our best chance to move forward in this, is for a united coming together of people of faith, of a variety of different religions. Because, at the core of our beliefs, I think for all of us, there's a fundamental belief in the value of human life and a fundamental commitment to compassion as a key value. We had a meeting here at the church a couple of weeks ago where we had a visiting sheikh from Lebanon, and we all signed together the Charter of Compassion. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Karen Armstrong was the inspiration behind that work. But it's a charter that urges religious communities and governments to bring compassion back to the centre as their sort of core values. The irony is in that the Australian government, I think, is the only actual government ever to sign on to the Charter of Compassion. And yet our government at the moment shows as little compassion as any government I've ever seen. I mean, absolutely tragic performance. So, But look, fundamental religious values, I think, of compassion and the values of human life should lead to very direct activism. In the Christian case in particular, I mean, Jesus stood up against the authorities of his day. He was killed by the authorities of his day. And he exercised a work of passivism and love in response to the violence that was inflicted on him. I mean, it's interesting to push that a bit further. John Howard Yoder, in his famous prize-winning book on the politics of Jesus, it's not a new book, but he pointed out that the only point where the epistle writers in the New Testament ever urged the imitation of Jesus, in the sense that Jesus wasn't married, but you don't see any of the New Testament authors saying, well, you shouldn't get married because Jesus wasn't married, or Jesus had 12 disciples. That there's no one said, well, therefore you should have 12 disciples. But the one point they do say you should imitate him it was in his refusal to hit back against violence. He was struck, but he did not strike back in return. This is the Apostle Peter. He was struck, but he did not strike back in return. He was reviled, but instead he responded with love. He did this so we might follow in his footsteps, says Peter, responding to violence with love, ultimately. Now, that's coming directly from Jesus. And those who follow him, surely that should be what we're trying to do, and respond to this sort of violence with creative love and energy. And, I don't understand why all Christian people, all people who are involved in the church in any way, shape or form, aren't out there actively supporting Julian, as we aren't actively trying to oppose the war machine, which threatens to destroy all humanity. But maybe we need a bit of creative leadership, bit of inspiration, someone to bring us together. But yeah, that is my hope, is that there will be a great coming together of people of faith, not just Christian people, but Christian people, Islamic people, Jewish people, Hindu people, coming together around our core values of compassion and justice and valuing of human life. And that should lead to a real support for Julian and WikiLeaks and what Julian's been trying to do as well.
I think it's incredibly remarkable for me as an observer to see the synergies between WikiLeaks' mission and what they're doing and the service that they're giving, and the sacrifices that Julian has made and the persecution that he's endured, and the mission of the church, and as the way that you're describing it. That seems so obvious to me now, and yet it's a connection that I wouldn't have made prior. Vivian did point out in the last stream that, in our last Vigil stream last month, that she felt that Julian's position was Christ-like in terms of the advocacy for truth and the persecution for having provided it. That there was a Christ-like element to it.
I see Julian as a prophet, a modern-day prophet. I mean, Jesus himself said, look at you, speaking to the religious leaders and authorities of his own day, you persecuted the prophets, you killed the prophets who came before you. And there's always been a history of persecution of the prophets. And the prophets were just people who spoke out, spoke the truth, shined the light in the darkness, refused to, people like John the Baptist, spoke out against Herod and told him what for, They're always eccentric people too, like Julian, I think, so yeah, I see people like Julian and my brother Morty and dear Chelsea Manning and others as really modern day prophets, people shining a light of truth into the darkness.
I'm already seeing the wonderful quote graphic that we'll make of that sentence that you just said. Because it's spot on. But and the thing is, there's so many different, like you look at Chelsea Manning as a very different person from any of the other whistleblowers represented by Courage Foundation. They're all different. They're all distinct. They're distinct personalities. They're distinct human beings, but they have this thread that binds them. And that thread is the conviction to tell the truth and the willingness to pay the sacrifice, to pay the price, to pay the price for it.
It's interesting. I mean, the one who fascinates me too is Ed Snowden, who just comes across as a wonderful human being. He's someone I'd really love to meet one day. Interesting, with so many of our whistleblowing sisters and brothers, they're often people who sort of, for one reason or another, I think are often a bit outside of the mainstream. And I think often you need to be a bit outside of the mainstream to be able to think creatively, to think outside the box. You know what I mean? So I think with Chelsea Manning, with her own struggles, or Morty, there's often internal turmoil that goes on that leads them to sort of look at things in a different way. And I remember wondering, Ed Snowden seemed to be a really straight sort of guy. He was doing well, a middle-class guy, no history of trauma. He's not persecuted for being Jewish or being gay or anything like that. What was it that drove him? I mean, that wonderful movie they made of him recently just showed him to be a guy, just a deep spiritual conviction, I thought. Again, he fascinates me.
To recognize the suffering of other people and be able to empathize with it, you usually have to have suffered yourself. You have to understand what suffering is. And I wouldn't make any assumptions personally about whether or not someone has endured suffering in their past, because I think that virtually almost everyone has, to whatever degree in their circumstances. But I do believe that the Ed Snowdens of this world know full well what it is to hurt inside, and that is the source, the well of their compassion and their empathy for other humans.
I mean, if not earlier, certainly now.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
Yeah. I mean, often, there's something like this in their past which leads them to look outside the square and to question the reality they've been fed, I mean, again, with Ed, what was it, With other people, it's more clear, I think. But whatever it was, God bless him. wonderful work he's done.
Just reading through chat. Okay, Dave, with half an hour to go, how are we going to inspire the masses? How are we going to build a movement?
That is such a good question. As I say, for me, my energies tend to focus on trying to bring together people of different religious traditions to try and mobilize us together in support of this sort of work. Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm coming from. I think appealing to our common core values, compassion, the valuing of human life, and the commitment to peace. I think these are core things. I think there's real possibility there, and it works hand in hand with the sort of revelations Julian gives us, because I think the very forces that are out there trying to divide us from each other, particularly divide religious communities, divide Christians from Muslims and Muslims from Jews, etc., like that. Part of the process of bridging those divides, is being aware of the revelations that are coming out of the way in which the divide, the flames of division have been very deliberately fanned and often started in the first place by government powers for their own reasons.
And those divisions extend even to, as a very wise activist told me in New Zealand, those divisions extend right down to the divide between man and women. These are also exploited, carving 50% of the population from the other 50% of the population.
I couldn't agree more. And I think our issues of sexuality, which we're still working through, are very much often exploited. And I mean, it's hard. How do we bring people together? I don't think it at a practical level. What say we do I try and do here at a local level is just say we're bringing together Christians and Muslims. We get a meeting together, eating together, boxing together, training together, doing normal human things together, and just sort of breaking down the isolation. So I think at a community level.
It seems, sorry to interrupt you, but it seems like, for example, with this event, it seems people need to be told that it's okay to be together. It's okay to interact together. Because they've been told, tacitly, passively, it's not okay. It's not okay. It's not okay to be seen with this person or that person or talk to this person or that person. I'm just thinking in terms of organizing this event, because at this event, we have truly represented the entire political spectrum. If you go through the guest list of the people who are involved here, we have every political ideology you can imagine. And we have achieved it at a time that is probably the most politically divisive of any in recent memory, particularly in American politics. It is very segregated, and everybody has been locked into their niche and told that the opposition is the bad guys and don't you dare associate with them and have nothing to do with them, or you'll be tainted by association and you'll risk being cast out by your political brethren if you cross those boundary lines. And we've managed to smash the boundaries completely and to bring everyone together. We did it by uniting them around one issue rather than uniting them around an ideology. And we did it by telling them it's okay. It's okay for us to do this. It's okay for us to have differences. It's okay if we don't come from the same background, if we don't think the same things, if we have disagreements, that's okay. And it seems by giving them that green light, that people are like, oh, yes, it's okay and it's good what we're doing. And now more and more and more people are jumping on board.
Yeah, look, I think tribalism is the great enemy. Tribalism is the great enemy. And I mean, religions are very prone to being used as a force for sort of building tribal identity. I mean, in a sense, we've all got to belong to a tribe, religious tribe, a ideological, political tribe, or a national, ethnic, whatever. But the danger of tribalism is you always think my tribe's better than your tribe. So by all means, be part of a tribe. Just, from my point of view, from a Christian point of view, Jesus was very much big on downplaying tribalism, and I think that's the heritage of the New Testament too, that whether you're Jew or Greek or rich or poor or male or female or black or white or whatever, that we're all the same, and I think this is what we're battling against.
That's the permission, the inclusiveness, the foundation of inclusiveness, the doctrine of inclusiveness gives permission for participation. It opens the borders. I want to say that it opens the borders. We're not closing people off. We're not confined within a tribe.
Well, this is the topic of my sermon yesterday, actually, sister.
Really?
Yeah. Just looking at the way St. Paul in the history of the new church, he battled to keep the church inclusive. I mean, in that case, they were trying to exclude people who weren't Jews. Well, not exclude them, just make them second-class citizens. They had to jump through a lot of hoops and change culture and change language or whatever, you know what I mean? I just think, ironically, it eventually goes around the opposite way. People are trying to exclude Jews, anti-Semitism, which is a terrible history in the church. But I think Paul lived and died, the Apostle Paul, for his great belief in the inclusiveness of the church, that nobody should be excluded, nobody should be treated as second class. All of us, deserve dignity, respect, and I think this is what we're the powers that be will always try and exploit tribal identity to break us down into smaller units and set one tribe against another. And we've seen that across the Levant, across the Middle East, done very effectively, particularly since the Iranian Revolution. I think very deliberately, forces of tribal division being fanned by imperial powers. And so how do we get back against that? For me, again, appealing to fundamental religious beliefs in the equality of all people, in the centrality of compassion, and all these things, particularly coming from a Christian point of view. If you're familiar with Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan, which is all about bridging racial divides. It absolutely core value from a Christian perspective, that our tribal identity is less important than our human identity, and that we're all linked. I think the Hebrew word bazar, meaning skin, it is the thing that makes us human, because we can touch each other. And these sort of fundamental values are things which make us equal. The fact that we can touch, the fact it makes us all one.
That's remarkable. And for the first time in all these years of following and studying WikiLeaks, I'm starting to see the Christian values in WikiLeaks, which is an association that I had not made in the past, but which now seems very obvious to me.
Look, I remember when we started the WikiLeaks party out here some years ago, which unfortunately didn't go as we had planned, but we were looking for a good slogan, and I think we ended up with "Courage is Contagious." But one of the proposals was "Let there be light," which I thought was great.
Wow.
But again, it taps right into what is fundamentally a core WikiLeaks value, and is a fundamental religious proclamation as well, isn't it? They're very deeply related. And I think too, in the first chapter of John, John talks about people not wanting to come to the light. They're scared of the light because their deeds are evil. How relevant is that to what we're dealing with here? People, again, running from the light, trying to extinguish the light, trying to shoot the messenger, this is the remarkable thing when you think about it. When the collateral murder video first came out years ago, I remember thinking then, okay, surely, people will see that and the American government will apologize, and the families who are being murdered there will be compensated in some way. And no, nothing is said. No apologies are made. On the contrary, every effort is made to shut down the revelation of truth and to imprison and persecute those who brought the truth to light. That's in a supposed democracy. That's incredible, and it reflects a real darkness.
Yeah, and the most perverse outcome of all is that they're planning their next regime change.
Which one are you referring to? They've done so
Iran.
many.
Yeah, exactly. I'm referring to Iran. So Last week,
Yeah.
we had Rudy
Look, no, I've seen that. I mean, best of luck. I don't think they could really, I don't think they could be serious about that. I didn't think they could be serious about invading Iraq either. I thought it can't happen. It did. But have they got any idea what they're dealing with in Iran? I've just come back from Iran. I was there a few weeks ago. And I thought when I got there, I thought a lot of people would be there might be a lot of murmuring going on. Oh my God, what's going to happen with the Americans? And no, nobody. Why would they want to attack us? They're completely oblivious. So no one would attack us. I remember reading a book on Iran years ago, the Iran-Iraq War, and talking about how the brigades of young children would go out and throw themselves under tanks, with explosives on them. And the author, who was Iranian, was saying, what sort of country would go to war with a country that does this with their own children? Fair point, and I'm not even wanting to criticize Iran. I've got great love for the Iranian people, who are very gentle, very peaceful people, and a country that's got no history of attacking anyone outside their borders for hundreds of years. What sort of country would attack a country like that? You'd have to be insane. I mean, what was it Chomsky always said? When America attacks another country for regime change or whatever, there's got to be three things. They've got to have something we want. They've got to have no way of defending themselves, and we've got to come up with an excuse. They're the three things. Now, and you can see how that's worked very well. Not worked well at all, but I mean, how those three things have been played out, Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Libya, etc. In the case of Iran, they can defend themselves. They so can defend them. It's like Russia or China. I mean, you're going to attack these countries? Come on. Now, I have to, part of me says they must know that they would so be biting off more they could chew. I mean, it would be insane. They must know that.
I agree with you, but Hedges, I was just speaking to Chris Hedges a couple of hours ago now, and he was saying that there is no rhyme or reason to these people, that it is conquest for the sake of conquest, and that they will bring about their own demise and their own destruction in their ignorance.
Yeah, and he may be right. I've got nothing but respect for Chris Hedges. I love his work. But if that's the case, then we're like lemmings charging off a cliff, aren't we?
Yeah, pretty much. That's basically what he was depicting.
Yeah, I cannot believe that anyone with a small degree of sanity would want to attack Iran. They're a very capable country, very capable people. And look, you speak to people in Iran, they're not all happy. The government's a bit authoritarian. Yes, they've got certain things they'd like to see changed. Of course they have. They'll change them themselves. Thank you very much.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're not waiting on us to come in and change them for them. Thank you.
Exactly.
I don't know why we can't see this. I don't think the Americans want the Afghans to come in and change things for them because they don't like Donald Trump. I mean, they don't like who would, but they've got to work that one out. We leave them to work that one out. For God's sake, leave the Iranians to work their issues out. Leave the Syrians to work their issues out. Too late for poor Libya at the moment, for God's sake. Anyway. Yeah. So I spend a lot of time in Syria, and it's just, you see the destruction, you see the cost in human life at the ground level. It's just these sorts of projects of destruction that are planned in, offices in Washington and places like that. People have no idea. And this is part of the problem, I think. They got no skin in the game. There was a time, I think they said, was it Constantine or one of these emperors, the last vision people had of him was girding up his loins and lifting up his broadsword and saying, right, follow me. And with the Roman emperors, less than a third of them died in their beds. They had a lot of skin in the game. You know what I mean? Like, you're a leader in those days. You make a decision to go to war with the Gauls, you're out the front. You know what I mean? That was the way it worked. You put your own life at risk. Now what we've got is people sitting in, Washington. I mean, what did it cost George Bush to kill 2 million Iraqis?
Tony Blair.
Or Tony Blair. What does it cost them to kill millions and millions of people?
Not only does it not cost them anything, but they're then celebrated, they're venerated, they're on book tours, they're on Ellen DeGeneres' show, They are rewarded.
Yeah, but the thing is, when they make these decisions to sacrifice the lives of their own people and the millions of people from foreign lands who they care nothing about, they know full well, win, lose or draw, it will cost them nothing. If they win, it's good kudos for them. If they lose, they'll end up profiting out of it anyway. And that is sinister. That is sinister. And I think real leadership, when you go back, requires you having some skin in the game. You know, that if you're going to put lives at risk, you take some of that risk yourself.
Accountability.
Yeah. Well, responsibility, you know what I mean? And skin in the game.
And yet again, I mean, that's another thing that WikiLeaks brings, is it brings that accountability. If you go and type Tony Blair's name into WikiLeaks, you're going to get a much different story than you're going to get from his Wikipedia page or from, you know, some PR nonsense in his book, his biography in his book. WikiLeaks is bringing accountability when it circulates truth about these people.
Thanks be to God. I mean, this is why, you know, we cannot be but disillusioned with, you know, mainline media and this sort of dominant narrative rubbish that comes out. I mean, there are no greater war criminals in the world than these people. Now, I'm not one to judge, but, you know, and it's not just an individual, it's an entire administration, an entire machine, a network of people, and they're just the figureheads. But even so, there are no greater war criminals than these people.
It's not a judgment, but an observation.
Someone needs to be held accountable. Something should be said. You know what I mean? In years to come, if there are years to come for the human race, people look back and think, what were we thinking? You know, we still look back at the Nazi regime and wag our heads and say, how could it happen? Without being able to reflect to the extent to which it's still happening. The propaganda machine is still whirring at full pace. People are still being killed. Genocide is still taking place. All this sort of thing.
Except it seems that we no longer care. I'm remembering like Rwanda. Remember the campaign after Rwanda? Never again, never again, never again. That's what they said. Never again will we allow this to happen on our watch. Never again will we sit idly while this happens. And never again was followed up by 20 years of raping and pillaging the entire Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, we said that very much after the Holocaust, after World War II.
Yes.
You know, Nuremberg trials and that, and let's never let this happen again. Yeah, it keeps happening. And, you know, well, how do we stand against that? Well, you know, in a sense, WikiLeaks is like the light shining in the darkness there. You know, says they're a great reminder of the fact that not everybody is bought into this. You know, there are forces out there trying to independent, you know, one man, and those who stand behind him, trying to combat these terrible forces that threaten to annihilate all of humankind and the planet. And
against all odds. And part of the reason we started this is because of the Bob Marley quote. How long shall they? Prophets! I didn't click. Oh my God, I didn't click. I've been saying this for years about Julian. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? The famous Bob Marley quote from Redemption Song. And that finally we need to actively stand behind our prophets and not allow them to be killed, that we need to save them, preserve them.
Yeah, look, all we can do is stand with them, you know, and, you know, I think that the great thing about the prophets of old is they'd often call down doom upon their own people. And, you know, when lightning struck, they went down too. You know, they were one of the people. They didn't sort of stand aloof from it all and criticize us from distance. They stood in the middle and they took the judgment when it came. You know, and in a sense, we stand alongside Julian. We recognize we do so at a level. You know, we have to put ourselves at risk in the process. Of course we do.
Chris here just said something. He said the Christian right is Christian fascism. Please explain to me what is the difference between what Chris Hedges would say is Christian fascists and these awesome protest chaplains that I see protecting people and standing in solidarity? What's the divide there? How do we have these two extremes?
Look, it's easy for me to be judgmental at this point and say, well, one group are really following Jesus and the others aren't. I actually think there's a real degree to it that's true. But look, I think the church as an institution, like any other institution, is subject to the same forces of corruption. You know, Lord Acton said, all power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. You know, and as soon as you start bringing people together and they stop just being a bunch of mates meeting together and form a sort of separate corporate entity, you know, another element comes in. There's all of a sudden there's a bottom line, and there's extra values that come in. I think inevitably, as soon as all sorts of institutions, governments, churches, mosques, whatever, a level of corruption creeps in at the base of that. It's just a question of to what extent that corruption takes over the institution, to what extent the values which come with corporatizing, profit, you know, and things like that take over the organisations as a whole. As I say, the saving grace of religious organisations is that at their basis they still have an ideology, a commitment, a creed, which embodies values of compassion and things like that. In the case of the Christian creed, embodies a lot of wonderful things. But I think, even then, it's quite easy, and history's full of terrible examples where the organisation, despite its creedal basis, gets completely corrupted by those values of the values of power and greed, the bottom line. And unfortunately, I think in these right-wing organisations, they're often not about power and money. Power and money. And that's what corrupts us. It's not only churches that it happens to, but the tragedy is it happens to churches too.
And we've seen them bring themselves down too by these means. I mean, we've had the Jerry Falwells and the whoever else like in the last few decades. So they pull this immense vast wealth, but inevitably their shortcomings bring them down.
Yeah, the thing eventually implodes because it loses all connection with, or it becomes obvious that it's lost all connection with the creedal basis of what we're supposed to be on about. But
which is what. Oh, so I'm so sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say, which is what Chris Hedges was foretelling for the empire as a whole.
Yeah, sorry, foretelling the implosion.
For the empire of a whole. He was saying that same process would occur.
Yeah, look, how much longer can it go on? You know, I remember hearing a very good academic say years ago, 2020 would be the end of the American empire. I don't know whether that's still on track. I mean, in some ways, it's already been stopped. I'd like to think Syria was the Stalingrad of the American empire, in a sense, in that, in as much as both the French and the Nazis were turned back to Stalingrad, hoping that Syria will be where the American empire is turned back. Won't continue. I mean, we're doing well. We're doing well in Syria. I think of myself as an honorary Syrian, I suppose, that I spent so much time with just ordinary people there who just praying, waiting, hoping that things will change. And, you know, all it really requires is for people like Mr. Trump and Mohammed bin Salman and people like that to decide, just to stop pouring money into the murder of people there.
Amazing to think that. But then who are their masters? That's the next question. Of
course. I mean, this is it, you know. I always say if I somehow stop believing in God, I'd still believe in the devil. It's all too sinister. You know what I mean? You can't point a finger and say, well, it's just a nasty man. You know, Donald Trump is a nasty human being. No, it's much deeper than that. It's much broader than that. St. Paul spoke about principalities and powers in heavenly places, you know, that operate at this sort of level. And, you know, that's what you're dealing with. It's some sort of spiritual war, ultimately, that we're fighting.
On that note, Dave, I believe that you were going to offer a prayer for Julian
Oh, we at that time already?
Yes, we are.
Oh, gosh.
We're at that time already.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, look, I pray for Julian all the time. I haven't prepared any profound prayer, but quite happy to say another prayer for him now, as we always do. Is now the time to do that?
Sure. Any words from the heart. I'm not meaning to force you to perform it all, but any sentiments that you have for him.
Yeah, Lord God, bless our brother Julian. Protect him. Strengthen him. Give him health. Give him strength. Surround him with people who love him, Lord, even if he can't be in direct contact with him. Give him an awareness of his friends, his family, and of all those who support him. And Lord, for the work he does, for the work he's given his life and his freedom for, Lord, strengthen us in the pursuit of truth, shining a light into the very dark recesses of our world. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, Lord. Protect Julian, protect us all. For God's sake. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, it's serious stuff, sister, isn't it? You know what I mean? We're not talking here about who's going to win the next footy game. We're talking about the future of humanity and the future of the planet. And it seems just so bizarre that there are such powerful forces out to destroy everything. But yeah, I mean, for me, ultimately, it is a spiritual war. What else can it be? And so we got to pray, and we got to give our lives in one form or another to try and stand against this. And the key, I think, is to do it in the right way, which is the way Julian's doing it, using the weapons of truth and compassion, wherever possible, not resorting to violence and fighting fire with fire, but fighting the darkness with light.
It's remarkable. I feel like this stream, we had many people reminiscing. We've had many people sharing information and messages with each other. And then with Vivian's arrival, we began to get philosophical, really philosophical for the first time in this stream. And now we're transitioned into, as you say, it's a spiritual war. I think even for those like myself that aren't conventionally religious, we can still see that it's a spiritual war. And it's also now I can feel the emotion of it all welling up, because it has been an all-consuming endeavor and we've only just begun. We're still at the beginning of it. And we have to find the reserves to finish the battle. Exactly.
I mean, God bless you for your powerful contribution, and for the work you've been doing, finding the resources to keep going. That's, again, for me, it's a spiritual thing, trying to dig deep into the resources that God supplies. But I think God does supply those resources. I trust God to supply them to you too, in his own way. I don't think you have to have a particularly powerful theology to be able to tap into the Spirit of God, the Spirit of truth, the Spirit of justice and peace. I think it's there for all of us.
I wonder if that's what Julian was referring to when he said that sometimes he wakes knowing. He wakes with knowledge. He doesn't have to learn it. The right thing to do comes to him at the right time. And I've certainly experienced this in my life as well, where you wake knowing what the action is that you have to take. It's an instantaneous awareness. And and when you follow that path, when you take those actions, spectacular things occur as a result.
Yeah, that's what we call the leading of the Spirit of God. You follow that. Now
I'm getting shivers. Good shivers, but shivers.
Look, however you name it, I think, ultimately, I believe that we're being led here somewhere, and we just got to have solidarity. Is actually, as you call this podcast, wasn't it, video cast? Strengthen each other in this process. That's a key thing.
The chat is just filled with love and lovely messages right now. Really. When you closed your prayer, there was just a huge string of amen, 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 all the way down the screen. And now people love hearts and talking about grace and solidarity. So this is the most poignant, most special close to this event that we could possibly have. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, look, it's an absolute privilege to be with you, an absolute to.
Thank you, Father.
God bless you, sister.
God bless you, sister. Thank you so much.